Close your eyes and imagine yourself walking through the heavy wooden gates of the Sui Palace. They groan like old actors taking the stage, their weight both ceremonial and secretive. Beyond them, not the clang of armor or the austere order of Imperial officials greets you, but a faint perfume of sandalwood and wine. Air coils through the air like a serpent, pulling you further inside. You step into shadows softened by lantern glow. And already you sense that this is no ordinary palace. History tells us that Emperor Yangdi of the Sui Dynasty ruled between 604 and 618 CE, a reign both dazzling and destructive. On one hand, he commissioned the Grand Canal, an engineering marvel that still snakes through China today. On the other, he was infamous for indulgence, banquets that devoured the empire's wealth, journeys that paraded his power while peasants starved, and chambers where beauty became as much a weapon as a song. He was remembered not only as a sovereign, but as a man who turned his court into a pleasure house. You walk along a corridor where the polished stones echo with your steps. Above you, silk banners ripple in the faint breeze, their colors shifting between deep crimson and gold. They are not merely decoration, they are veils. They conceal alcoves, shadowed balconies, secret places where whispers once bloomed like forbidden flowers. It is said that Yangdi commissioned halls specifically for leisure, for acts not written in official scrolls, but etched into rumor. The Ngokhoa Palace, historians note, was more like a grand theater of desire than a seat of governance. And yet beneath the weight of legend, there are questions. Did Yangdi truly build these chambers for pleasure, or did later dynasties exaggerate his sins to justify his fall? Scholars argue over the scale of his decadence. Some insist that the tales of naked courtesans rowing lotus boats, of wine poured like rivers, are part truth, part smear. Others suggest that the details, too elaborate, too consistent across sources, are fragments of reality. The truth hides in the space between lantern flame and shadow. Imagine a courtyard opening before you, the air heavy with the scent of plum blossoms. At its center is a pool still as a polished mirror. Lanterns hang from carved beams above, their light reflected in the water, until it seems you are staring into an inverted sky. Along the edges, women move like drifting silk, their laughter faint like bells rung in distant temples. You are not sure if you are intruding on a ritual or a dream. The sound of zithers drifts through the night, delicate as water falling onto jade. Officials, weary of endless debates in the throne hall, are absent here. In their place, courtesans with painted brows glide among guests, pouring wine, offering riddles, reciting verses written to both amuse and ensnare. A hand reaches out to adjust a lantern wick. Another hand pours more wine than could possibly be drunk. This is not politics, and yet it is. Yangdi understood that power could be dressed in silk as easily as in armor. Historians still puzzle over this duality. Was Yangdi simply a tyrant addicted to pleasure, or was his indulgence a form of theater, a way to bind loyalty through shared decadence? Banquets, after all, were not only about appetite. They were stages where alliances were forged, where enemies were lulled into complacency by wine and beauty. Each cup poured was both invitation and trap. Each glance from behind a fan carried meaning. You move deeper into the hall and the shadows shift. The wooden beams creak above you, painted with dragons and clouds, as though heaven itself leaned closer to watch. At the far end sits the throne, not in cold grandeur, but softened by silk drapes and low lanterns. The emperor's seat here is not elevated as in the court. Instead, it blends into the setting, suggesting that Yangdi wished to be less a ruler of law and more a master of desire. A hush falls. From behind a gauzy curtain, the Emperor himself steps forward, or perhaps you only imagine it. His robe is heavy with gold thread, his gaze sharp yet languid. Around him women kneel like petals scattered at his feet. The scene is at once majestic and unsettling. You realize you are not in a palace of governance. You are inside a sanctuary of shadows, where the Empire's fate is tangled with silk ribbons and whispered promises. In the silence that follows, a single lantern flickers, its flame bending toward you. It seems to ask whether you will linger in this place of forbidden ritual, or whether you will turn away. But history offers no escape. To understand Yangdi, you must walk further into the glow, deeper into the corridors where fact and fable intertwine. For in this palace, shadows do not merely conceal. They reveal slowly, deliberately, like silk sliding from the shoulder of a dancer. And you, silent guest, have only just arrived. The night deepens, and you find yourself moving through another passage, guided not by guards or officials, but by a trail of lanterns swaying in the still air. Each one glows with a warm, honeyed light, casting long, quivering shadows across the lacquered floor. The corridor bends, then opens into a garden that seems to belong more to myth than memory. The Ngok Palace was said to contain such spaces, gardens designed not for quiet meditation like those of monks, but for spectacle, indulgence, and temptation. Here the Emperor recreated paradise not as scripture described it, but as desire imagined it. The garden blooms with peonies, orchids, and plum blossoms, their fragrance mingling with the musk of burning incense. It is not the earth that dominates the senses, but the sky reflected in the water before you. A wide pond stretches out, perfectly still until the first boat glides across it. Not a fisherman's vessel, but a floating stage. Painted barges with curved prows drift gently, each one illuminated by lanterns shaped like lotuses. And upon them courtesans recline, women chosen from across the empire, trained not merely in song and dance, but in the art of illusion. Their silk robes slide loose at the shoulder, catching the lantern glow like molten gold. From afar they appear as living constellations drifting across a mirrored night. History records that Yangdi delighted in these water pageants. Chronicles whisper of nights when dozens of boats, laden with wine and women, glided across palace lakes. The Emperor would sit upon a terrace, watching the spectacle as if surveying a private cosmos. Some accounts claim that his courtesans were ordered to row bare-skinned, their laughter echoing like sirens. Whether literal or symbolic, the imagery survives, the palace garden transformed into a sea of forbidden stars. You pause at the water's edge. The sound of zithers drifts once more, carried by the night air. One courtesan plucks a string, and the note quivers across the pond like a pebble striking glass. Another lifts a cup of wine, pouring it into the water. The ripples spread, merging with reflections of lanterns until it seems the pond itself has drunk. Was this indulgence, or was it ritual? Historians debate. Some argue that Yangdi's excesses were exaggerated by later dynasties eager to vilify him. Others suggest that these ceremonies were political theater. The emperor's court was notoriously unstable. Alliances shifted like wind through bamboo. Perhaps these pageants were his way of binding the loyalty of officials, wrapping them in silk and drowning their ambition in wine. Pleasure can be as much a chain as iron. A courtesan sings, a voice delicate as falling snow. The words are from an old poem, about rivers that forget their course, about blossoms that bloom only to be scattered. The song is both lament and invitation. You feel as though the entire garden leans closer, listening, its shadows pressing gently against your skin. The Emperor appears, not in the stern armor of campaigns, not cloaked in the heavy regalia of the throne, but in a robe of pale silk, embroidered with dragons whose bodies coil like smoke. He does not shout. He does not command. Instead, he sits among the lanterns, wine in hand, the master of a world where reality dissolves into dream. At his feet, courtesans kneel not as subjects but as instruments of theatre. They lift their faces toward him, eyes half shadowed, half gleaming, and you sense how power here is measured not in decrees, but in glances. The boats continue to drift. Some carry only women with fans of white feathers. Others hold musicians, their instruments echoing across the water. A few bear officials, stripped of their dignity, coaxed into laughter by courtesans who flatter, tease, and entangle. It is said that Yangdi enjoyed seeing his ministers rendered foolish, their masks slipping in the glow of pleasure. A man who laughs too freely cannot conspire. A man who drinks too deeply cannot rebel. And yet beyond the glittering surface unease stirs. You wonder at what cost was this garden built. How many peasants bent their backs to quarry the stone, to dig the ponds, to haul the timber for these pleasure palaces, while Yangdi floated on lakes of silk and wine, fields beyond the walls withered under neglect. This is the paradox of the Forbidden Garden. Beauty is always purchased with suffering, but only some are invited to see the petals bloom. The song fades. A courtesan raises her fan, fluttering it like the wing of a moth. Another pours more wine, her sleeve brushing against the Emperor's hand. The air grows heavier, scented with lotus and smoke. You realize that you are not meant to judge this place, only to witness it. For history has already judged Yangdi harshly, branding him a tyrant undone by decadence. But as you stand here, watching lanterns drift like fireflies across the pond, you understand why the story endured. It was not simply about excess. It was about theatre, about how a man turned his reign into performance and his palace into an eternal stage. The night deepens further. The lanterns burn lower, their reflections trembling like fading stars. You hear laughter from the boats, but it is softer now, blurred by distance and drink. Perhaps this garden was never meant to be remembered as fact. Perhaps it was meant to linger as dream. And so you remain silent as the Emperor's court drifts past you, an empire afloat, fragile, luminous, and doomed. The corridors twist again, drawing you toward a hall that seems to thrum with echoes, though no one yet stands within. Its doors are carved with phoenixes rising from clouds, their wings spread wide as if ready to fly into the night. You step through and the air thickens immediately, perfumed with sandalwood musk and something sharper, the sweet tang of wine lingering in wood grain and velvet cushions. This is the banquet hall. Not the austere court where ministers bicker over borders, but a theatre of appetite, where dishes and bodies alike were served with equal ceremony. History whispers that Yangdi held feasts here so lavish that a single night could devour the rations of an entire province. Scholars record that the emperor once ordered 1,000 dishes prepared, each one adorned with gold leaf or rare spices, each bite a declaration that his power was measured not in laws but in extravagance. Imagine the tables stretching endlessly, lacquered black and red, their surfaces glittering with porcelain bowls and jade chopsticks. Bronze braziers smoke with roasted pheasant, duck glazed with honey, pork simmered in wine until it glistened. Fish from the southern seas lay beside melons, hauled from distant oases, proof that the emperor's reach spanned not only rivers and mountains, but climates and seasons. And yet food was only the first layer. Courtesans drifted among the dishes, their gowns cut from gauze so thin it seemed the air itself dressed them. Their laughter floated as lightly as the steam rising from teapots, their voices reciting verses that blurred between poetry and provocation. One adjusted the sleeve of a guest, another poured wine until the cups overflowed onto the floor, staining the stone like blood spilled in ritual. The records claim that wine here was not served in cups alone. Sometimes it flowed through elaborate fountains, sometimes from silver spouts shaped like dragons, so that guests drank straight from the creature's mouth. A Tang historian centuries later sneered that Yangdi once filled an entire canal with wine, his courtesans floating down it in lotus boats, dipping ladles into the current. Was it true? For a grotesque invention to justify his empire's collapse, historians argue still. Yet the imagery persists, so vivid, so decadent, that it feels less like fabrication and more like a memory that refuses to die. The courtesans themselves were more than companions. They were performers, trained to recite lines, play instruments, even challenge guests to riddles and debates. To falter before them was to expose one's weakness. To impress them was to win the emperor's fleeting notice. Each laugh was a test, each cup of wine a wager. In this hall, alliances could be sealed by a toast, or undone by a misplaced glance. You sit, or rather you imagine yourself sitting, on a low cushion near the center. Before you, a silver plate gleams with candied lotus seeds, sticky with honey. A hand reaches past you, slender fingers brushing your sleeve as they deposit a folded fan. You open it. On its silk surface, a poem has been inked, a riddle of loyalty disguised as verse. Is it the gift of a courtesan or a message from the emperor himself? You cannot tell. That uncertainty is the point. Above, lanterns sway with the rhythm of music, zithers and drums weaving a sound that feels both languid and relentless. The shadows of dancers ripple across the walls. Silk brushes against silk. Sleeves extend like wings, then collapse like petals folding at dusk. Each movement is a metaphor, each turn of the wrist a reminder that power, like desire, thrives in performance. Historians note that Yangdi's reign was not only remembered for its excess, but for how it blurred boundaries. Pleasure became politics. Indulgence became intimidation. By drowning his court in luxury, he silenced dissent. Who would dare argue against taxes when their mouths were stuffed with rare fruits and their eyes blinded by beauty? Yet some scholars wonder if this strategy backfired, whether the very ministers who toasted him in crimson wine secretly despised him, their loyalty dissolving as quickly as sugar in hot tea. A hush falls. At the far end of the hall, curtains part. A figure enters Yangdi, or perhaps only his echo. His robe is heavy with brocade, embroidered dragons shimmering in the lantern glow. He does not sit at a raised throne but among his guests, as though to remind them that he is both participant and master of the revelry. He raises a cup. Wine spills over its rim, dark as blood. The courtiers rise to echo his toast, but you notice some hesitate, their eyes clouded with unease. For indulgence can be intoxicating, but it can also be corrosive. A feast may bind men together for a night, but hunger always returns. And when the music fades, the debts remain. You lean back, the cushions sinking beneath you. The hall feels smaller now, the lanterns dimmer, though the feast still glitters. A dancer passes by, her sleeve brushing your shoulder like a whisper of silk. In that moment, you realize this banquet is not a celebration. It is a stage where loyalty is purchased, desire is weaponized, and history itself is seduced into remembering only the shimmer, never the shadow. And still, you are not permitted to leave. The night deepens, and the Emperor's theatre has many acts yet to unveil. The night shifts again, and with it the scene. You hear the faint lap of water before you see it. The hall dissolves into an open courtyard, where a great pool stretches like a captive lake, its edges lined with carved stone dragons spouting streams into the surface. Lanterns float upon the water, bobbing gently, their flames trembling as though uncertain whether they burn for light or for secrecy. Here is where the most infamous tales of Yangdi reside. Historians recount that he ordered the Ngokho Palace adorned not merely with banquet halls, but with artificial lakes designed for entertainment. Upon these waters, he unleashed his most scandalous spectacles, boats shaped like lotus blossoms, drifting slowly under the moon, each one rowed not by oarsmen in uniform, but by women, naked courtesans, their hair adorned with pearls, their bodies gleaming like marble statues animated into flesh. The chronicles are divided. Some insist the tales are exaggerated, smears invented by the Tang dynasty to tarnish the Sui. Others argue that the details are too elaborate to be fiction, their consistency across accounts suggesting truth wrapped in embellishment. What endures is the imagery. Rivers of wine, courtesans rowing beneath banners of silk, laughter echoing across the water like the call of distant bells. You step closer to the pool. The reflection of the lantern stretches long, bending into shapes that resemble spectral dancers. From the far side, music begins, pipes and zithers echoing across the water. A boat glides into view, its prow shaped like a blooming lotus. 4 women kneel upon it, their bodies hidden only by strands of beads, their movements slow, ritualistic, almost devotional. They dip oars into the water, not with haste, but with deliberate grace, as though each stroke were part of a sacred ceremony. A second boat follows, then a third, until the pool resembles a garden of drifting flowers. On the shore, guests lounge on cushions, their cups refilled endlessly, their gazes caught between the water's shimmer and the women's slow choreography. The air is perfumed with incense, smoke rising from bronze braziers, curling into patterns that seem to form dragons, phoenixes, and figures unseen. You imagine the Emperor himself watching from a pavilion above, seated upon lacquered wood inlaid with jade. His expression is unreadable, perhaps delight, perhaps calculation. For while the spectacle seems to exist for pleasure, it is also theatre. Each guest who partakes becomes complicit, bound not only by wine but by silence. Who, after all, could condemn an emperor for extravagance if they themselves had drunk from the same goblet, witnessed the same forbidden rites? One account suggests that the boats were more than floating stages. They were arenas of subtle competition. Courtesans selected from across the empire performed not only for their emperor but against each other. The most graceful, the most clever, the most bewitching could ascend into favor, while others drifted back into shadow. It was not unlike politics. Alliances made with glances, destinies decided with gestures. The water glimmers beneath the moon, silver and black. Courtesan on one boat raises her arm, scattering petals into the air. They fall like a silent rain, some landing on your shoulder, though you cannot be sure whether it is real or imagined. The petals dissolve into the water, carried away by the slow churn of oars, as if time itself erases the evidence of the night's excess. Historians still debate what these scenes reveal of Yangdi's reign. Was he a tyrant so consumed by desire that he squandered the empire's strength on shallow pleasures? Or was he a strategist, weaving loyalty and distraction into a spectacle that masked the fragility of his throne? Perhaps both are true. Pleasure and ruin often drink from the same cup. You lean over the stone balustrade, the scent of plum blossoms mixing with wine and smoke. The boats circle once more, their courtesans lit like living lanterns against the darkness. You sense the weight of history pressing in, not the weight of armies or decrees, but of shadows and whispers, the kind that survive longer than monuments. The water ripples, the music fades, and the spectacle dissolves. Yet the image lingers in your mind, a river of desire disguised as ritual, an emperor enthroned not upon marble, but upon the fleeting shimmer of reflected fire. And you, silent guest, are still caught in the current. The courtyard and its floating lotus boats dissolve into another scene. This time the sound reaches you first. Laughter, clinking cups, the roll of drums. You step into a grand hall, its roof carved with golden phoenixes, its floor polished smooth as a mirror. The air is heavy, thick with the mingled scents of roasted meats, lotus wine, and sandalwood smoke curling from censers. Here, Emperor Yangdi staged his infamous feasts. History tells us that he was a master of spectacle, and the banquet hall was his theater. Food was not merely nourishment. It was weapon, symbol, and seduction. Imagine whole oxen roasted until their skin glistened, ducks lacquered with honey and spices, trays of sweetmeats piled so high they resembled mountains. Cups of jade brimmed with rice wine warmed until steam fogged the air. Yet beneath the grandeur whispers linger. Records hint that Yangdi demanded variety so vast that even the empire strained to supply it. Silk traders carried spices from the western deserts. Pearls from the southern seas were set into goblets, not to be worn but to dazzle as wine refracted through them. It was said the emperor sometimes ordered rivers of wine to flow through channels carved into the banquet hall, so guests might dip their cups directly into the stream. Historians argue, is this extravagance truth or exaggeration? Could any emperor truly squander so recklessly while famine haunted the countryside? Some scholars claim these tales were moralistic propaganda written by later dynasties, eager to condemn Yangdi as decadent. Others insist that the sheer scale of his projects, the Grand Canal, his lavish tours, makes the stories plausible. After all, a ruler who could command an empire to carve waterways through mountains would not balk at rivers of wine. You take a seat among the imagined guests. Women in flowing silk glide past, carrying trays balanced like offerings. Their sleeves brush your shoulder, soft as whispers. The light flickers on golden vessels, and the sound of zithers trembles in the distance. To your left, a noble recites a poem, his words slurred with drink, while to your right, a courtesan pours wine until it spills onto the floor, ignored in the haze of laughter. Yangdi himself is seated on a raised platform, not aloof but surrounded. He lifts his cup and the hall falls silent. With a glance, he signals the beginning of the feast's true purpose. For these were not simply meals. They were rituals of control. To be invited was to be bound to him. To be excluded was to be marked as suspect. Each guest left the hall drunk not only on wine, but on the intoxicating sense of belonging and the fear of exile. In one corner, musicians strike their zithers with sharper force. Dancers enter, their feet bare upon the polished floor. They move in spirals, silk ribbons trailing behind them like streams of smoke. Their faces are painted pale, their lips bright as cinnabar. Some sources whisper that these dances turn scandalous, the women shedding veils until their movements resembled both prayer and seduction. Again, historians dispute. Were these scenes part of Yangdi's reality, or the invention of scandalized moralists? Perhaps the truth is simpler. Both history and rumor are correct. The emperor's banquets may have contained layers, official ceremony on the surface, forbidden pleasures beneath. You sip from your jade cup. The wine is strong, burning your throat, sweet at the end like the taste of a dangerous promise. The sound of drums quickens. The floor trembles with the weight of dancers leaping. Lanterns swing above, their light painting the hall in shifting shades of red and gold. The whole space feels less like a court of governance and more like the heart of some secret ritual. And there, watching from the shadows, the emperor's eyes gleam. Every laugh, every poem, every drop of spilled wine is his creation. You realize that in this hall, politics is not argued with scrolls and decrees. It is whispered in riddles, sung in verses, hidden behind silk sleeves and sealed with cups raised to trembling lips. The feast continues without end. Guests stagger. Courtesans steady them with gentle hands. Dancers spin until the world blurs. The night stretches like molten gold, heavy and irresistible. You sense that in this palace banquets are not meals at all. They are mirrors of power, excessive, intoxicating, and always binding. And as you rise to leave, you are not sure whether you are drunk on wine or on the weight of the emperor's design. Step outside and the cool night air greets you. Lanterns sway in the breeze, casting rippling light across the surface of an artificial lake. Here at the Ngokhua Palace, water itself became a stage. The emperor commanded that this lake be filled with floating boats, carved like lotus blossoms, each rowed not by soldiers or servants, but by women of his court. You pause at the edge of the water, listening. The gentle splash of oars is softened by laughter that drifts across the surface like mist. The boats are laden with silk cushions and jade cups, their edges decorated with painted blossoms that never wilt. On each vessel courtesans recline, their robes slipping like petals loosened by the wind. The faint glow of lanterns paints them in shades of crimson and gold, so that the whole lake seems alive with fireflies and shadows. History insists this was no ordinary entertainment. It is said that Emperor Yangdi loved to host floating banquets, where wine was poured until the lake reflected a world both real and imagined. Courtesans chosen for their beauty and wit sang verses and strummed zithers as they guided the boats with bare hands and oars carved from sandalwood. Sometimes rumor claims he demanded they shed their robes entirely, their bodies becoming the sails of desire that carried his knights into legend. But here, too, scholars hesitate. Did such scenes truly unfold, or were they embellished by later chroniclers eager to paint him as a villain of indulgence? Some argue that these tales served as moral warnings, parables about the dangers of excess. Others counter that the details, silk oars, jewel-encrusted boats, are too consistent across sources to be invention. The line between record and rumor blurs like lantern light across water. From your place on the shore, you watch one boat drift closer. Its courtesans are singing, their voices lilting as though coaxed from the depths of the lake itself. The lyrics speak of longing, of spring nights that vanish too quickly, of beauty that fades like plum blossoms after rain. A hand dips into the water, scattering ripples of gold and shadow. Another hand raises a cup of wine, its surface catching the moonlight like liquid silver. You notice that Yangdi sits at the largest boat's center, surrounded by women whose laughter folds around him like veils. He does not shout commands or deliver decrees. Instead, he watches with half-lidded eyes, content to let the spectacle unfold. In that moment, he is less emperor than orchestrator of a dream. And yet beneath the dream lies the truth. Each boat, each courtesan, each song was bought with the empire's wealth. The Grand Canal, though an engineering wonder, had drained the coffers. Taxes rose, peasants starved, soldiers grumbled. As Yangdi floated through nights of silk and wine, rebellion brewed far from these glowing waters. Still, in this hour, you cannot hear rebellion. You hear only the hush of oars, the hum of zithers, the rustle of silk against wood. The lake gleams with forbidden beauty. The night feels eternal. But then a thought intrudes. Was this lake truly filled with joy, or with the muted sorrow of women compelled into service? Behind every painted smile might lie silence. Behind every song a story untold. Historians wonder, were these women companions, artists, lovers, or prisoners of ritual? Their voices reach you sweet as birdsong, yet tinged with something deeper. The lanterns sway again. A breeze carries the scent of lotus blossoms across the water. You blink and the scene shifts. The boats drift further away, until they seem like shadows of memory. And in the silence that follows, you realize the Emperor's Lake was not merely a stage for pleasure. It was a mirror. To some it reflected paradise, to others decay. But to history it remains an enigma, half myth, half memory, gliding forever on the surface of time. You return to the inner corridors where the air runs cooler, and the lamps are shaded with carved lattice, turning light into patterns that crawl across the floor like tame serpents. Here the palace grows quieter, the music distant, the laughter swallowed. You have walked past the stage. Now you approach the wings, rooms where pleasure is rehearsed, where beauty is not an accident, but a discipline. History says that courts across China practiced palace drafts, nutuyan, the choosing of girls from provinces and noble houses to enter service. Under Sui Yangdi, the mechanism appears to have quickened, a velvet net cast wider than before. Names vanish in the ledgers and reappear as titles: attendant, musician, reader of poems, keeper of fragrance. A few rise to favored consort. Many remain petals pressed between pages of a book. No one opens again. Scholars agree on the draft. They quarrel over its scale. Was it the routine intake of an imperial court, or an appetite accelerated by a single man's design? The records differ like voices through silk. You pause before a screen painted with cranes. A seam parts, and a teacher steps through. An older woman in plain silk, her hair pinned with a single jade comb. She does not smile. She gestures you into a long room lined with low benches and an elevated mirror, polished bronze wide as a door. In its surface the lamps appear doubled, as if night had grown two sets of eyes. The school breathes like a cloister. Girls sit straight-backed, sleeves arranged so the cloth falls like water from a cup. On a raised platform, a musician sets the rhythm. Two gentle strikes on a wooden fish, then silence, then two more. With each pulse a different art is practiced. At the first strike, a student lifts her wrist and lets a sleeve descend in a perfect arc. At the second, another places a cup precisely where the light will turn it to amber. At the next, three stand and bow together, their movements as synchronized as oars entering a lake. Here the body learns grammar, how to enter a room carrying a fragrance before a word, how to lay a fan on a table like a seal pressed into wax, how to pour wine so the last drop clings and then surrenders, as if by persuasion rather than gravity. A laugh is not simply a laugh. It has notes, lengths, endings. The women practice each ending until it lands like a ribbon upon a cushion. A scroll rests by the teacher's knee, verses to be memorized, anecdotes polished to a shine, riddles that can be answered three ways. innocently, cleverly, or with allure. In one corner, a calligrapher corrects postures, pressing two cool fingers at the small of a student's back so her spine straightens like bamboo. In another, a perfumer teaches the arithmetic of scent. When to wear plum over sandalwood, when to hide the rose beneath musk, so that the discovery feels like a secret earned. Mainstream histories tell of Yangdi's extravagance on the surface, the feasts, the journeys, the canal that stitched north and south like a seam down the empire's robe. What they rarely declare outright but imply in the margins is that his court relied on choreography, not only the movement of armies and grain, but of eyes, hands, and breath. In this school you see the hidden budget, hours spent polishing gestures until they shine brighter than jade. Yet fringe stories creep in like drafts through a screen. They claim a hidden exam given to candidates at midnight, each asked to row a low boat across a still pool without disturbing the lamp balanced on its prow. Those who reached the far side dry were admitted to the lake of lanterns you have already seen. Those who spilled even a drop returned to kitchens and storerooms, their task to feed the spectacle rather than become it. No chronicle confirms it. Still, when you glimpse a narrow pool beyond the training hall, its surface black as lacquer except for a single floating flame, your heart tilts toward belief. There are other whispers. A scribe, they say, hid behind the bronze mirror to transcribe unsummoned words spoken when the teacher left the room. Which student muttered envy? Which one defended a friend? Which one criticized the emperor's verse under her breath? The list went not to the schoolmistress, but to the eunuch who governed these corridors like a priest of silence. Scholars dispute the plausibility. Too elaborate, too theatrical, they protest. And yet the palace itself seems to argue otherwise. The way the mirror is fixed to the wall, the way the floorboards beneath it bear a different grain, as if they were lifted, relaid, hand asked to forget the hands that touched them. Eunuchs pass the threshold without sound, their faces smooth as uninked paper. They correct nothing aloud. Instead, a bell rings once when a chin is too high, twice when a glance is too direct, thrice when a word carries heat better left banked. These men are called powerless by those who do not understand the geometry of courts. Here their power is the ability to map desire and reorder the room so it suits the emperor's dream. A lesson in approach begins. Her senior student walks a path of light. 3 slow steps, pause, 1 breath, then the final 2. At the pause, she tilts her head, offering profile not to flirt, but to allow the lantern to trace her brow's clean line. The teacher taps the floor. Again. The student repeats it softer, then softer still until the steps barely exist, and only the intention remains like the echo of a bell carried on air. You move to the bronze mirror. Your reflection stands beside a young woman practicing the small art of refusal, the polite deflection of a cup too full, the way to decline a poem that veers toward insult without bruising its author's pride. It is a difficult dance, this act of gentle no, and one suspects it is the school's most honored skill. The empire beyond these walls may answer with swords. Here danger is met with a sleeve. Historians still argue over the purpose of such training. Some insist it was purely ornamental, designed to delight a ruler lost to folly. Others suggest a darker utility, that the women of the Hoa Palace were, in effect, diplomats in silk, tools to measure moods, to soften enemies, to gather murmurs and carry them like fragrance to the inner court. Which is more likely? You cannot say. You only notice how often the lessons pivot from song to silence, from offering to observation. A door opens at the far end. From it, night enters. the crisp scent of water and lantern smoke. The teacher dismisses the class with a nod, and the girls rise as one, bowing until their hair ornaments chime like tiny bells. They leave in pairs, every back straight, every step memorized. For an instant the room is empty, only the bronze mirror and you and the fading warmth of breath. Then a final student lingers. She approaches the mirror and studies herself, not as an artist admiring a finished stroke, but as a traveler reading a map. Her face shows neither pride nor fear. She lifts a sleeve, lets it fall, and in that small gesture you see the palace entire, the banquet halls and boats, the garden and its drifting lights, the emperor seated like a horizon of gold. You understand that this school does not teach charm. It teaches translation, taking hunger, longing, and power, and turning them into a language the night can speak without waking the rest of the world. When she leaves, the mirror holds your gaze a moment longer, as if asking what you have learned. You do not answer. In this place, even understanding must be practiced in silence. And somewhere beyond these corridors, the Emperor's theater waits for its next act, ready to test the lessons of 1,000 soft refusals and a single devastating smile. The further you walk from the rehearsal rooms, the colder the corridors become, as if the walls themselves are withdrawing their warmth to preserve a secret. Here the lamps are caged in latticed bronze. Their light falls in measured squares, like coin laid out for counting. The laughter of the banquet halls does not reach you. Instead, you hear the smallest sounds made enormous by quiet, the brush of sleeve against brick, the tick of oil settling in a wick, then, unmistakably, a bell. One note only. Thin as a thread. Someone has pulled a cord hidden in the shadow of a pillar. Somewhere else in the palace, another bell will answer, and the room you just left, whether school, garden, or banquet, will shift by a hair. A cushion adjusted, a door eased, a guest delayed by a courteous question. You have wandered into the precincts where the night is tuned. Mainstream histories speak of eunuchs as keepers of the inner court, gatekeepers to the emperor, stewards of stores and schedules, guardians of seals and screens. Under Emperor Yangdi, the network thickened. The Grand Canal bound provinces. Within the palace, another canal was dug, of errands, nods, and signals that moved information with equal certainty. Who entered at what hour, who left without being seen, which fragrance lingered where it should not. These were lines in an invisible ledger. Scholars agree on the bureaucratic reach of eunuchs in many dynasties. They debate how far that reach extended in the brief Sui. Some argue that Yangdi's reliance on spectacle required such an apparatus. Others claim later chroniclers, hostile to eunuch power, painted the picture darker than it was. The debate remains like a hand behind a screen, present but indistinct. A doorway admits you into a long, low chamber. Shelves climb the walls, filled not with scrolls alone but with objects arranged with surgical care. Fans labeled in a fine hand, sachets tied with neat cords, hairpins resting on pads of folded gauze. Each bears a small wooden tag, incised with 2 characters, where it was last seen to whom it belongs. On the central table, a register lies open. The columns are narrow, the brushwork almost painfully restrained. At the top of each page, the date. Beneath, an anatomy of the night. Lamps in the south corridor refilled at the second watch. Musician of 7th rank replaced broken string. No injury. 2 cups of wine removed untasted from the dais. The script is placid. The implications are not... You understand standing here that the palace sustains itself on arithmetic, Not only of taxes and tribute, Yangdi's reign is famous for those, the canal financed by labor drafts and levies heavy as bronze, but of glances, pauses, exchanged objects. A dance that ended one beat too early means something, and it is measured. A cup left full means something, and it is measured. A smile that should have landed like silk, but fell like stone. It too is entered in the book. A eunuch glides past you, his steps noiseless, his robe the color of cool ashes. He carries a tray upon which sits a single bell and a coil of red cord. He does not look down when he passes the register. He does not look up when another bell sounds. Two quick notes now distant as if a sparrow had struck glass. His face is unadorned by expression, but his progress through the room has the confidence of a cartographer crossing land he himself has mapped. Fringe stories say these bells form a language. One note to slow, two to divert, three to close the inner doors, four to light the cups with stronger wine, five could mean danger, six, a change of audience, an envoy to be separated from his interpreter, a minister from his ally, a concubine from the girl who steadied her on the stairs. No extant manual explains it. No official gloss survives. And yet every corridor seems to possess the iron tacks of a code hammered in beneath the lacquer. If the boats and banquets are the visible face of the emperor's dream, this is the hidden pulse that keeps it coherent. You follow the eunuch through a side passage where the bricks have been rubbed smooth by careful hips. The smell changes. Less sandalwood and wine now, more paper and damp stone. Behind a screen of pierced wood sits a narrow desk with two brushes resting across a shallow dish. A parchment lies half-written, the characters composed with the unnatural calm of a hand that has learned to hold itself apart from its words. Historians still argue whether eunuchs under Yangdi were mere functionaries, or something closer to ministers of mood, advising when to draw the curtain and when to lift it, which verses to cue, which riddle to suspend in the air like a spider's silk. The Sui corpus is lean. Much of what we know comes refracted through the tang. Slander, perhaps, but even the skeptical admit a practical necessity. A court that choreographs desire must also choreograph consequence. Someone must know who is drunk enough to promise, who is sober enough to remember, who should be guided toward the lotus lake, who should be guided to bed. In a small alcove you find a shelf of sealed packets. Each is stamped with a mark, not the Imperial dragon but a tiny bell. You weigh one in your hand. It is heavier than paper alone. The fringe tale returns to you, the mirror that listened, the scribe who wrote what the teacher never asked, the midnight exam across still water. You imagine the contents, lists of names, sketches of disposition, recipes for a night's success. No record in the Orthodox histories admits such a thing. Still, the packets exist, and their weight is persuasive. A map hangs on the far wall, not of provinces or rivers, but of the palace itself traced in delicate ink. Halls and gardens, kitchens and wine rooms, the lake like a black pearl. Along its margins someone has drawn small circles, each with a number. At the bottom is a legend so spare it borders on insolence, one source. 2 delay, 3 remove, 4 replace, 5 forget, 6 remember. You think of the bells and feel the room lean a degree toward inevitability. Another eunuch enters, younger, cheek still round with youth that has not yet thinned into bureaucracy. He brings a lacquered box bound with silk. The older one accepts it without ceremony, slides it open and reveals inside nothing spectacular. A handful of folded poems, a broken hairpin, the tiny cork from a perfume vial. The younger man speaks finally, his voice soft as dust. From last night's eastern dais. The elder nods once, not in thanks, but in acknowledgement that the world has continued to happen and therefore must be filed. He tucks the broken pin into a drawer labeled Returns, closes it with 2 fingers, and rings the bell once. Somewhere far away a lantern will brighten. Somewhere nearer a conversation will cool by a degree. You think of Emperor Yangdi seated at the center of this theater, not merely indulging but relying on bells that tug the fabric of night, on men whom rumor calls powerless, yet whose fingers touch every hinge. Power in such a place does not always shout. Often it chooses the tone of a single bell and trusts the room to obey. The official histories will later weigh him and find him wanting. They will write of the Grand Canal's glory and the tax that purchased it in human breath, of tours so extravagant they became parades of estrangement, of rebellions rising like unwatched fires. They will note coolly that in 618 a coup ended his reign, that Yuan Huaji's blades were the last bells he heard. Scholars will debate how much to blame the banquets, how much the wars, how much the man. But here in the legered chambers, you glimpse a different equation. Excess is not merely consumption, it is orchestration. The emperor's nights did not sprawl, they were composed. And composition requires keepers of time. You leave as you came on the measured squares of light, passing shelves that seem to breathe the faintest sense of rose and ash. Another bell sounds, 2 notes this time, like a question and its echo. The ledger waits, the brushes sleep, the packets hold their modest, lethal truths. When you step back into the corridor, the palace has resumed its other voice, music drifting, water ticking, silk remembering the shapes of those who wore it. You understand that the delight you have witnessed is inseparable from the design that sustains it. The theater of desire needs stagehands who love shadow, and somewhere ahead another door will open, and the night, obedient to its bells, will turn the page. You emerge from the corridor of bells into a space so wide it seems designed to swallow sound itself. The ceiling soars above, lacquered beams painted with dragons that wind upward into the shadows, their eyes catching glints of light as if alive. Below the floor is polished jade, smooth enough to reflect the lanterns that line the walls in a slow procession of flame. But it is not the architecture that stills your breath. It is the river. Yes, a river running straight through the hall, not of water but of wine. Its surface ripples with a crimson sheen under the lanterns, like molten rubies flowing between carved stone banks. Small bridges arch over it, delicate as calligraphy strokes, each one adorned with silk tassels swaying in the perfumed air. The scent is overwhelming, sweet, sharp, intoxicating. You feel half dizzy just standing at its edge. Historians tell us that Yangdi's banquets were infamous for their excess. Chronicles describe wine ponds, where nobles and concubines floated in lotus boats, cups of gold bobbing like lilies on the surface. Was there truly a river of wine? Some scholars scoff, arguing such tales were exaggerations penned by later dynasties eager to vilify a fallen emperor. Others point out that similar accounts appear across multiple sources, too vivid to dismiss entirely. Even if not literal, one historian remarked, the metaphor alone reveals the scale of indulgence. And perhaps, as you stand here staring at the impossible stream, you understand history's metaphors sometimes congeal into flesh. From the shadows, musicians tune zithers, their strings trembling in anticipation. Courtesans step onto boats carved like lotus petals, their bare feet brushing the surface, sending ripples across the wine. Their robes, sheer as mist, are tied with golden sashes that glitter when they move. One boat drifts close, and you see her raise a cup to scoop the liquid directly from the stream. She offers it to a guest, her lips curved in a smile that promises both delight and danger. When he drinks, the lantern light flickers across his face, already flushed. Fringe tales insist that the emperor demanded these rituals often. Women rowing with jeweled oars, their laughter echoing as though the palace itself giggled. To refuse to join was unthinkable. To falter in grace was perilous. It was said that Yangdi sometimes sat on a throne overlooking the river, tossing tokens of jade into the current. Whoever retrieved them, soaked, perfumed, half-drowned, won favor for a night. But favor was as volatile as flame. Today's chosen companion might be tomorrow's discarded shadow. And what of purpose? Historians argue, was this indulgence merely vanity, or was it theater designed to dazzle? Some see it as political manipulation. Invite envoys, generals, ministers, immerse them in beauty until they could not think of dissent. Bind them not with chains, but with silk, with the memory of luxuries too rare to resist. The river of wine was less banquet than trap, its sweetness disguising the bitter taste of loyalty surrendered. You cross one of the arched bridges. The scent of alcohol rises around you like incense, seeping into your robes. Below, cups float lazily, some overturned, spilling offerings into the current. A courtesan catches one with her hand, lifts it like a prize, then downs it in one elegant tilt. Her companions laugh, their voices soft yet charged with competition. It feels less like drinking and more like a ritual, a secret sacrament of surrender. At the far end of the hall, a dais rises, draped in silks the color of dawn. Here the emperor would sit, not aloof but enthroned among cushions, his robes loosened as if the river itself had dissolved the weight of law. Imagine him there, heavy cup in hand, his eyes scanning the flow of boats, the dance of women, the shifting loyalties of men who feared to appear unimpressed. Each sip he took was mirrored by 100 others, each sigh of pleasure echoed like liturgy. And yet imagine also the silence that followed when the night ended. The wine gone, the lanterns extinguished, the river nothing more than a sticky channel to be scrubbed by servants before dawn. Did the emperor ever walk here alone? Did he ever listen to the hollow drip of the last drops, the echo of laughter now vanished? Or was he too intoxicated, too certain, to notice that excess corrodes even as it glitters? You lean over the bridge and dip your fingers into the stream. The liquid clings thicker than water, leaving your skin scented and sticky. You think of peasants in the fields beyond the capital, bent beneath the sun, their throats parched. A river of wine for a few, drought for millions. Perhaps this was the true measure of Yangdi's reign, a torrent of indulgence that drowned its own foundations. The zither strikes a note, high and trembling. The courtesan raises her oar, and droplets scatter like crimson pearls across the air. The emperor's laughter, imagined or remembered, rolls like thunder through the hall. And you, silent guest, stand at the edge of a current that carries not only wine, but the empire itself, toward pleasure, toward ruin, toward memory. The river of wine drifts into shadow, its glow fading into something softer, more secretive. At its far end, you see boats waiting, slender, curved like petals, their hulls lacquered black and painted with blossoms that gleam under lantern light. Each boat is a miniature stage, and each passenger a performer. You step closer, drawn by the sound of laughter, by the swaying movement of silk against polished wood. They call them lotus boats, not because they are shaped as such, though many are, but because of the illusion they create. a garden afloat on red currents, each vessel blooming like a forbidden flower. The courtesans who ride them are petals, drifting wherever the current takes them. Some kneel, pouring cups from gilded flasks. Others recline, hairpins glittering like constellations in the night. Their voices are low, melodic, weaving songs of longing and riddles of wit. Historians argue whether these lotus regattas were truth or fable. The Book of Sui makes little mention of them, but Tang-era poets wrote with relish of Yangdi's indulgences. Women in translucent gowns rowing with ivory paddles, their laughter spilling across the water like bells. Some suggest the tales were exaggerated, crafted as moral warnings. Yet the detail, boats painted with lotus, the rule that only concubines could row, appears too consistently to ignore. Perhaps, as with all forbidden things, the boundary between fact and legend dissolved like incense smoke. You watch one boat glide past. Its rower stands barefoot, her robe clinging to her body, dampened by the spray of wine. Each stroke of her oar sends ripples into the current, and with it, the fragrance of fermented sweetness rises like a breath. On the prow, another woman balances, scattering petals from a lacquered bowl. They fall into the stream and spin away, pale pink against the crimson tide. It is a spectacle both enchanting and unsettling, a ritual as much as a performance. A guest reaches out from the shore, his sleeve trailing dangerously close to the liquid. The courtesan laughs and leans toward him, cup extended. But the rules of the game are clear. She does not simply hand him the wine. He must lean forward, must risk his balance to receive it. Desire here is not given. It is chaste. He drinks, coughing slightly at its strength, and she withdraws, her eyes glinting like a challenge. Whispers say that sometimes these boats carried not just wine and laughter, but secrets. Alliances were murmured from prow to shore, promises floated across the current. A general might receive more than a cup. He might receive a word in his ear, a subtle sign of imperial favor. A minister might watch, jealous, knowing that the emperor's gaze had lingered too long on another. Power drifted with these boats, light as petals, heavy as chains. And what of the women themselves? Were they willing blossoms, nurtured in luxury, or captives plucked from gardens across the land? Chronicles differ. Some say Yangdi summoned maidens from every province, their beauty measured, catalogued, and delivered to court. Others claim many were volunteers, families eager for proximity to power, no matter the cost. Either way, once inside the Ngokua Palace, they became part of the floating garden. Ornamental, yes, but also dangerous. For in every petal lies the thorn of envy, the poison of rivalry. The boats circle back toward the center pool, where music swells. You see them form a ring, lanterns tied to their bows glowing like a constellation upon the water. Courtesans raise their cups in unison, a silent toast to the emperor. It is said that at times Yangdi himself joined them, stepping barefoot into a boat, his robes trailing dangerously near the liquid. He would let himself be rowed like any guest, feigning humility, though everyone knew the river flowed only because he commanded it. Scholars debate, was this merely indulgence or a deliberate display of inverted order? The emperor, the son of heaven, allowing himself to be ferried by women, to surrender momentarily to beauty. To some it was arrogance, the mockery of ritual. To others it was theater, a performance of omnipotence. Even in surrender he was in control, even in pleasure he remained emperor. The zither plays again, this time joined by drums. The rhythm quickens. Boats sway, collide softly, scatter apart. then reform like dancers in a choreographed ballet. The women's laughter grows louder, rising over the music, over the hum of the crowd. And then silence. Lanterns dim, boats still. All eyes turn toward the throne draped in silk. A figure rises. Perhaps it is Yangdi. Perhaps only the memory of him, shimmering in the heat of wine and candlelight. His hand lifts, and the river stirs as though bowing to his will. The courtesans kneel in their boats, their oars resting flat, their heads bowed low. In that moment, you understand. The lotus boats were not just diversions. They were symbols of empire adrift, of beauty harnessed, of power masked as play. You blink and the boats drift past once more, their petals scattering into the crimson current. The laughter returns, soft as bells. The spell lingers, fragile and eternal. The night unrolls like silk, and with it the palace itself seems to shift. Doors open where there were none, corridors lengthen, courtyards fold into avenues. You realize this is not merely a residence. Under Emperor Yangdi, the court could move, becoming procession, convoy, rumor with wheels. The river of wine fades behind you. Ahead another river waits, darker, colder. Real the Grand Canal. History grants Yangdi an unarguable monument, a waterway that stitched the empire from north to south, binding Luoyang to the grain-rich basins below, a spine of stone and water that would outlive the Sui who ordered it. Scholars agree. Its construction was feverish, its cost immense, its utility transformative. Barges of rice would glide along its length, feeding capitals that would otherwise starve. And yet this artery also carried something less forgivable, the emperor's desire to be seen. You stand on a moonlit bank. Lanterns are raised by the hundred, each hooded so their light spills down like disciplined rain. From the darkness emerges the traveling court, an armada of pavilioned barges and floating halls, their roofs tiled like peacocks' backs, their curtains breathing. The water slaps wood in patient applause. Servants step from gangways with steps so practiced that even the canal's push does not sway them. They call it the moving palace, and once you see it, the name is plain. On one barge, kitchens glow, steam wreathing the cooks' faces. On another, musicians tune zithers and pipes. On a third, a pavilion open on three sides, its pillars painted cinnabar, its floor strewn with carpets that swallow footfall. Somewhere among these is the Imperial barge, larger by understatement rather than ornament, its corners softened by silk screens, its profile a low, confident line. Mainstream records speak of Yangdi's southern tours to Yangzhou, to Jiangdu, to places whose names taste like fruit on the tongue. He traveled with retinues so vast that villages emptied to line the banks, forced or eager depending on who tells it. On these journeys, the emperor inspected locks and sluices, accepted petitions, rewarded officials. He also held banquets upon the water, the river itself conscripted as corridor and stage. The chronicles tally the expense with thin-lipped arithmetic. So many barges, so many thousands of laborers drafted to dig, to tow, to bow. Fringe stories embroider the ledger with silk. They claim that at the first watch, a perfumer walked the towpaths scattering powdered sandalwood, so the emperor's approach could be smelled long before it was seen. They claim mile markers were wrapped in yellow cloth and oiled nightly so the moon would find them and point the way. They claim that among the barges was a chamber where women chosen from local prefectures waited behind gauze, 2 from each stop, a living map of beauty across the empire. No orthodox scroll proves this, and yet when the wind shifts, you catch a scent that is not the canal's. a sweetness not of lotus or wine but of intention. The convoy hushes. The Imperial barge drifts into view. Its lanterns are fewer than those around it, and somehow brighter. You glimpse the silhouette of a man seated within, his profile a coin you could recognize even in the underworld. The line of the nose, the tilt of the head, as if listening to a music only he hears. A woman kneels just behind him, pouring, not touching the cup to the brim, leaving a breath's allowance so the liquid won't spill with the river's pulse. The discipline you saw in the School of Silk has followed the court onto water. Historians argue over the meaning of these tours. Were they proclamations of imperial reach, legitimate inspections of a new artery that would feed the realm, or were they theatre laid upon necessity, indulgence hitching itself to utility until the two were indistinguishable? Some scholars insist the tours bled the provinces of grain and men. Others counter that an emperor must show himself, must let the provinces feel the weight and warmth of his person. In the debate, the canal runs on indifferent, carrying both rice and rumour. You board a lesser barge at the invitation of a eunuch whose face reflects nothing but lanterns. The deck creaks with familiarity, as if it has carried the same weight for years. Cushions, low tables, trays of fruit nested like planets in bronze bowls. The water is the only voice muttering along the hull. A curtain lifts, timed to the dip of an oar, and reveals inside a room no larger than a shrine, pillows, incense, a zither waiting like a question. The world has narrowed to the human scale of appetite and attention. From here you watch the towns slide past. At each bend, people kneel along the banks, their faces a constellation of pale ovals in the dark. Some raise banners, some raise nothing at all. You cannot tell who is compelled and who is compelled by awe. The distance flattens motive. A boy holds up a single peach in both hands, as if it were a treasure the emperor might accept from the shore. The barge passes. The peach remains. A ripple lifts, sets it rocking. There is a ritual to night landings, you learn. The barges moor in stages. First kitchens, then quartermasters, then musicians, then the Imperial pavilion last, as if the night itself must be laid down before the emperor steps onto it. In a riverside hall prepared days before, the floor is sprinkled with rice, both blessing and broom. It catches grit from sandals so the carpets will not have to. A bell rings once, remember, and the air fills with a hum of alertness. Candles are trimmed to a height that flatters faces. Cups are warmed. The first poem is chosen, already 4 lines old, so it can be finished on the spot as if born in the moment. Fringe rumour lays a darker layer over the choreography. They say that at certain towns where the tax is bit hardest, the emperor ordered the barges to arrive at the hour when the moon was thin, so that lanterns would seem more necessary than bread. Beauty rendered as argument. They say that after applause, after wine, after a night's borrowed radiance, the requisition lists grew longer by a clever hand. Was it true? Scholars shake their heads, then admit the possibility that every dynasty reshapes its predecessor's shadow. The Suis is short and therefore dense. You step back onto the deck after midnight. The convoy dozes, moored like a bracelet laid aside. The water breathes against pilings. A lone zither note drifts from somewhere, someone practicing the curve of a phrase so it will land in a certain ear at a certain hour tomorrow. From the Imperial barge comes the faintest murmur, neither command nor laughter. The moving palace is asleep, but its dream continues. Locks opening, gates swinging, distances shortened by decree. And yet the current has opinions. In the dark beyond the lantern spill, reeds whisper in a language older than courts. You think of the laborers who dug this spine with hands that blistered into maps. You think of the soldiers left at winter posts while the barges drifted south in pursuit of spring. You think, not harshly, that even genius can haul its own doom along behind it like a wake. Historians will later mark a point where celebration became estrangement, Jiangdu's pavilions lit too brightly, Luoyang's granaries too bare, murmurs coalescing into men who measured loyalty against hunger and found it light. The canal made movement easy, for rice, for rumor, for rebellion. In 618, when steel clicked in a corridor and Yangdi's world folded, some would say the river had already delivered the message days before. For now, the barges float in order, and the emperor's silhouette is a steady coin against silk. A breeze rises, borrowing fragrance from bankside plum. The lanterns nod. The canal goes on a ribbon and a warning. You close your eyes and listen to the water tell its patient story, how it carries everything offered to it, grain, light, voices, power, and returns each gift transformed. When you open them again, the moving palace has not moved at all. It only seems that way because time has decided to flow. The barges dock, the day fades, and once more you are led through a sequence of corridors that bloom like petals into a hall of impossible brightness. This is no temple of law. This is the banquet hall of Emperor Yangdi, a place where night itself was trained to serve. Imagine a chamber where ceilings vanish into painted skies, dragons curling among clouds, immortals gazing down with expressions half reverent, half amused. The floors glisten with lacquer, polished so smooth they mirror every flicker of flame. Tables of carved sandalwood stretch in long rows, not with scrolls or maps of the realm, but with vessels spilling over, bronze basins of steaming broth, jade bowls of fruit gleaming like jewels, towers of pastries that defy gravity by sheer confection. Wine jars are lined along the edges, their clay necks sealed with red wax ready to be broken as casually as twigs. Mainstream history notes these banquets with unease. Chronicles describe the feasts of Yangdi as vast drains upon the treasury, ceremonies where officials were compelled to attend, drinking cup after cup until obedience itself was distilled into inebriation. They record lists of delicacies brought from far provinces, fish from the southern rivers, dates from the desert edges, grains gathered from fields that groaned beneath forced quotas. The expenses tallied, always more than the previous season, as though pleasure had its own inflation. But fringe accounts embroider these figures with silk and shadow. They whisper of performances, where courtesans dressed as river nymphs entered on boats, wheeled silently across polished floors. They speak of acrobats suspended from the rafters, pouring wine from silver flasks directly into waiting goblets below. They tell of a peculiar ritual. At the stroke of midnight, the emperor would command the lamps to be dimmed, plunging the hall into a twilight where only lanterns of red glass remained. In that glow, every face was softened, every gesture slowed, as though the very air thickened into perfume. Scholars argue whether such stories were invention, propaganda seeded by later dynasties to condemn the Sui. Could any ruler truly squander such wealth nightly? Yet inscriptions from excavated storage jars near Luoyang suggest shipments of wine far exceeding military rations. Tablets list quantities of sugar and fruit preserved in honey, on a scale absurd for a land at war. The evidence refuses to vanish, like the aftertaste of spice on the tongue. You walk among the guests. Silk brushes your sleeve, lacquer bowls clink like bells. To your left, a poet unrolls a scroll and improvises verses comparing the emperor's reign to a river of wine, each stanza punctuated by applause. To your right, a courtesan leans close to whisper a riddle in an official's ear, her words meant for him alone, yet the smile she leaves behind is a message to every watcher. At the far end, musicians pluck zithers so lightly the notes tremble as though embarrassed to be heard. Yangdi presides not from a throne raised high, but from a dais draped in silk, lanterns casting more shadow than light across his features. He gestures languidly. "Servants, hurry!" He raises a cup. The hall follows. He lowers it. The sound of hundreds of cups striking wood is thunder, carefully choreographed. This is indulgence, yes, but also theater, ritual disguised as appetite. Every swallow a pledge, every bite an acknowledgement of power. As the night deepens, the air itself seems altered. The scent of roasted meats fades beneath the stronger pull of sandalwood incense. You hear laughter, but it is softened, dreamlike, as if wrapped in gauze. A man stumbles, and courtesans catch him not with rebuke but with polished smiles. A cup tips, spilling wine across the floor, and attendants wipe it swiftly, their movements practiced, almost rehearsed. You wonder how many times this scene has repeated, how many nights the empire bled itself dry beneath the velvet cover of celebration. Then comes the moment of spectacle. From behind silk curtains, dancers appear, their robes translucent, their movements slower than breath. They do not simply dance. They enact allegories. Phoenixes rising from fire, rivers turning to clouds, kingdoms bending at the waist before the emperor's gaze. Every step is an argument. Every veil lifted, every fan unfurled is a syllable in a language of submission. The guests watch, rapt, half enchanted, half afraid. For to look away would be to reject the emperor's vision, and who among them dares? Historians note that banquets in ancient courts often served as camouflage for politics. Alliances were sealed not in daylight, but in the warmth of wine. Yangdi's feasts were no exception. In the corner of your eye you see an official slide a folded letter beneath a tray. Across the table another nods minutely. Agreement wrapped in silence. A concubine recites a poem whose ending line could be praise or warning, depending on who listens. The banquet is not only pleasure, it is parliament without scrolls, a court of shadows where words cost less than gestures. And yet, there is danger here. The emperor's appetite grows with each night, and the empire's granaries grow emptier. Even within the laughter, you hear whispers of resentment. The musicians play louder to cover them, but you, drifting through like a silent guest, cannot help but notice the tension beneath the silk. How long can such feasts continue before the hall collapses under its own weight? The banquet stretches past midnight, its boundaries blurred by wine and smoke. A eunuch trims the wick of a lantern. Sparks leap, then fade. Courtesans laugh too brightly. Officials bow too deeply. The emperor's gaze drifts over all of it, sharp yet bored, like a man trying to outdrink his own shadow. At last, you find yourself standing at the edge of the hall, looking out through a carved lattice into the night beyond. The air outside is cold, the stars impassive. Behind you the feast continues, oblivious to the frost at the edges of the empire. You understand what historians mean when they write that Yangdi turned his palace into a pleasure house. It is not the silk or the wine alone. It is the sense that the empire itself has become a guest at this banquet, its strength poured cup by cup until the jar is empty. The music swells once more, then hushes into silence. The night bends. You breathe, uncertain whether you stand in history or in allegory. Perhaps here in Yangdi's banquet hall, the two were always the same. The feast dissolves like a dream, but the night does not end. You are led once more through corridors where the air grows softer, heavier, until the silence itself begins to pulse. Beyond carved archways, the gardens of Ngokhua Palace open before you. Gardens not of flowers alone, but of secrets cultivated like orchids in the dark. Imagine terraces descending in layers, each one framed with lattices entwined by vines. Moonlight filters through, but it does not dominate. Lanterns of red silk glow like suspended hearts, casting shadows that lengthen across bridges and pavilions. The pathways are paved with smooth stones that glimmer faintly underfoot, as if soaked in dew. Pools mirror the sky, and from their surfaces drift lotus petals scattered deliberately, an artful chaos. These gardens are not for prayer nor for meditation. They are stages, as carefully designed as the banquet hall. Mainstream records describe Yangdi's gardens as marvels of design. He imported rare trees from southern jungles, trained gardeners to coax blooms out of season, and built artificial hills to mimic sacred mountains. Scholars write that his pavilions were linked by winding streams where wine cups floated downstream, a game borrowed from earlier dynasties. Guests would sit beside the water, each composing verses before the cup reached them. The gardens, they say, were living poems, but other accounts suggest a more forbidden layer. They speak of hidden alcoves behind screens of bamboo, where the emperor might wander unseen, listening to laughter, watching shadows entwine. They tell of courtesans trained not only in song, but in the art of ritual seduction, movements choreographed like dances, designed to appear spontaneous. They whisper of bridges where, at midnight, a single lamp would be extinguished as a signal. Who met there, who vanished beyond the gaze of the court, remains a matter of speculation. You walk through these imagined gardens now. Your steps are muted on the stone path. A breeze carries the scent of night-blooming jasmine, rich and almost overwhelming. From a pavilion nearby comes the pluck of a lute, faint, hesitant, as though the musician plays only for the shadows listening beside you. You pause beneath a willow whose branches trail like curtains. The leaves shiver, and you wonder if they conceal a watcher. To your right, a bridge arches over water black as lacquer. On its surface float small boats carved of wood, each holding a single candle. The flames bend in the wind, trembling like fragile confidences. It is said that lovers would inscribe wishes on slips of silk, tie them to these boats, and send them drifting toward the emperor's pavilion. Did Yangdi read them? Did he smile, amused at the illusions of secrecy in a world where every whisper was eventually carried to his ears? Historians still debate the purpose of such gardens. Were they merely aesthetic, or were they political traps? Some argue they were designed to encourage indulgence, drawing officials into compromise situations that the emperor could later exploit. Others insist they were spaces of genuine pleasure, escapes from the harsh demands of rule. The truth may lie in the balance. Gardens that fed both appetite and strategy, as intoxicating as they were dangerous. The fringe tales grow darker still. A few chronicles claim that Yangdi enjoyed disguising himself, wandering the gardens as an anonymous guest. Cloaked in plain silk, he would sit beside courtesans and listen as they recited poetry or confessed secrets. Some say he revealed himself with a gesture, others that he never did, leaving behind only the faint unease of having spoken to a shadow. Whether fact or legend, such stories capture the essence of these gardens, places where identity blurred, where masks grew as thick as the vines. You move deeper, past carved pavilions painted with phoenixes. In one, dancers rehearse silently, their bare feet leaving no sound upon the wooden floor. Their veils catch lantern light, glowing like ghosts. They bow to no one, for no one is present, and yet the performance continues, as if the garden itself demanded offerings. You realize then that this place is not only for people, but for memory. Every movement, every echo is a ritual reenacted across centuries. The air grows cooler as you approach a secluded grove. Here the lanterns are fewer, their glow swallowed by the thickness of the trees. A marble bench stands beneath a pine, smooth from countless hands and cloaks. Did lovers sit here, waiting for the rustle of footsteps in the dark? Did ministers plot alliances here, using the language of metaphors disguised as poetry? The silence presses on you, heavy but not hostile. It is the silence of secrets that have grown comfortable with themselves. And then faintly you hear laughter. Not the raucous laughter of banquets, but the low ripple of voices close together. It comes from beyond a hedge, where light flickers irregularly, as if a lantern sways with movement. You do not intrude, but you understand. This was the true heart of Yangdi's pleasure palace, not the spectacle of hundreds gathered, but the intimacy of a few hidden among shadows. Historians have long wondered if Yangdi's gardens were metaphors for his reign. Beautiful, elaborate, fragrant, but requiring constant labor, endless expense, and destined to wither without care. Some describe them as symbols of imbalance, an emperor who built marvels while ignoring the hunger of his people. Others see in them a desperate attempt to control even nature, to bend the seasons into his service, just as he bent officials and courtesans alike. As you linger in the garden, you feel the tension of both interpretations. The air is too sweet, the silence too staged. It is both sanctuary and trap, paradise and prison. For those who walked here, pleasure was never free. It was a coin with two sides, indulgence and obligation. The garden fades slowly behind you as you step toward another corridor. The music is gone now, replaced by the sound of wind in the pines. You leave the whispering shadows, carrying with you the knowledge that even beauty can be sharpened into power. You step once more through a winding corridor, the scent of plum wine still clinging faintly to the air. But now the atmosphere shifts. It is no longer the staged grandeur of banquets, nor the perfumed secrecy of gardens. The palace seems quieter, yet somehow more alive. Here rumors take shape, whispered tales of an emperor who abandoned his own golden mask to walk among shadows. History records Emperor Yangdi as vain, indulgent, desperate for admiration. He commissioned grand portraits of himself, staged parades that lasted for days, even demanded the construction of towers so high they pierced the clouds. Yet alongside this ostentation exists another tradition of stories, of Yangdi disguising himself, shedding silk and jade to cloak his form in plain robes, wandering the very palace he commanded, as though he were a ghost among his own courtiers. You walk into a chamber lined with lacquered screens. The paint has dulled with time, but the images remain vivid. Dragons coiled in clouds, phoenixes frozen mid-flight. Behind such screens, it is said, Yangdi once shed his robes of state. He would don the garments of a servant or a wandering scholar. A simple robe of blue or grey, a sash with no jewels. His crown traded for a cloth cap. To look upon him in such moments, no one would guess he ruled an empire stretching across China. But why would an emperor choose to erase himself? Historians puzzle over this. Some argue it was vanity in reverse, a chance to hear the unfiltered whispers of his courtiers and concubines, to catch truths that would never be spoken in the throne room. Others suggest it was indulgence, a thrill in playing at vulnerability, in watching desire bloom for a man no longer recognized as sovereign, but as a stranger. and some believe it was loneliness. Power, after all, can be a prison gilded in gold. You imagine him walking through the gardens in such disguise. A lantern sways in the wind. Two courtesans giggle at a verse of poetry, unaware that the quiet man seated nearby is their emperor. Heir servant grumbles softly about the waste of silk in the banquets, never knowing his complaint falls directly upon imperial ears. And sometimes, perhaps, Yangdi revealed himself at the final moment. A single word, a gesture, and masks would collapse. The shock on their faces would be part of the performance. But darker tales persist. Some claim that Yangdi used these disguises not merely for play, but for surveillance. He would listen for disloyalty, for murmurs of dissent, and those who spoke too freely found themselves suddenly absent from the palace. Was this theater of intimacy, or a net of suspicion cleverly woven from shadow? The truth is blurred like the flickering flame of a candle. You walk deeper into this imagined memory. The corridors are hushed, lined with carved pillars that catch the lantern light. A door creaks, and you step into a smaller chamber. The furnishings are simple. A low table, cushions, a bronze mirror polished to a dull glow. This, perhaps, was where Yangdi looked at his disguised reflection. Did he laugh at the irony that a man who demanded the most extravagant of robes could also take pleasure in appearing ordinary? Or did he sigh, relieved to escape the weight of his crown, if only for a night? One chronicle describes him joining games of wine in disguise, reciting verses as if he were a traveling scholar. His wit and memory astonished those present, but they never guessed his true identity. Another account claims he once sat with courtesans as they whispered about the emperor's faults, nodding gravely, even agreeing with their criticisms. Only later, when he revealed himself, did fear replace their laughter. Yet Yangdi did not punish them. Instead, he rewarded them for their honesty, or perhaps for their performance of honesty. Historians still argue, were these tales propaganda, inventions of later dynasties, eager to paint him as capricious and cruel? Or do they reflect genuine practices of rulers who sought both amusement and intelligence in disguise? Other emperors of China are known to have walked among their subjects in plain dress, testing the loyalty of their people. Why should Yangdi be any different? The fringe details are even more unsettling. Some suggest that Yangdi found pleasure in being desired not as emperor, but as a man stripped of power. That in these secret wanderings, he sought glances unclouded by fear, touches unshaped by duty. The line between truth and legend blurs, but the image remains potent. A sovereign stepping into his own shadows to find something he could never claim beneath the dragon throne. As you linger in this imagined chamber, the bronze mirror catches your reflection. For an instant you wonder, is the face that stares back yours or his? The mirror warps the image, bending light into something both familiar and strange. You realize that disguise is not merely cloth or gesture. It is the very essence of forbidden history, where truth hides beneath layers of performance and power becomes a game played with masks. The lantern flame wavers. The room grows colder. Somewhere beyond, the palace murmurs on, unaware of the cloaked figure who listens in silence. And you, silent guest, feel the echo of his presence. The emperor who vanished into his own corridors, seeking truths only shadows could reveal. You tread softly now, as though the stones beneath your feet remember too much. The palace corridors stretch before you, but the air feels different. The fragrance of plum blossoms has faded, replaced by the scent of damp wood, extinguished incense, and something heavier, a silence that carries the weight of endings. History teaches us that Emperor Yangdi's reign ended not in triumph, but in betrayal. By 618 CE, rebellion surged like floodwaters across the empire. The Grand Canal he built, once a ribbon of glory, became a highway for discontent. The lavish banquets that once dazzled his court now stood as symbols of waste, of a ruler who had feasted while his people starved. And in the palace itself, loyalty thinned like worn silk. His ministers whispered, his soldiers wavered, his courtesans sang softer songs, their eyes already drifting toward the future. You step into a vast chamber where lanterns hang extinguished. The Ngok Palace, once ablaze with music and wine, now echoes only with the rustle of banners, limp and faded. Here Yangdi once sat enthroned amidst rivers of wine, courtesans rowing lotus boats across jeweled ponds, their laughter scattering like petals. Now the pond is dry, the laughter a ghost. Shadows claim what silk once adorned. One chronicle describes his final days not in splendor, but in exile within his own walls. He retreated south, fleeing the capital, trailed not by armies but by rumors of betrayal. The emperor who once commanded pleasure barges filled with song now found his world shrinking to dim corridors and fearful whispers. In Jiangdu, far from his northern court, he lived in a palace stripped of grandeur. Still, he clung to rituals of decadence, banquets held even as rebellion thundered outside the gates. Some say he believed the performance itself could hold back ruin, that desire staged as theater might stave off despair. And then came the night of betrayal. Accounts differ, as they often do when history stains itself with blood. Some say his own generals entered his chamber, blades drawn, their loyalty long sold to the promise of survival. Others claim it was courtiers, men once drunk on his wine, now sober with ambition. The emperor, it is said, was found in his bedchamber, the lantern light trembling across his silken robes. They strangled him with a silken cord, an end both cruel and symbolic, for silk had been the very fabric of his reign. You stand in that imagined room. The drapes stir, though no wind moves them. The faintest flicker of light casts shapes upon the wall. A throne abandoned, a cup of wine spilled, the shadow of a man who once ruled like a god. Yet in death he became fragile, mortal, undone by the very theater he had perfected. Historians still debate, was Yangdi a tyrant whose indulgence destroyed his dynasty, or a scapegoat, condemned by successors eager to erase his accomplishments beneath tales of decadence? The Grand Canal endures, a monument of engineering genius, yet his legacy is tangled with visions of naked courtesans, rivers of wine, and chambers of forbidden pleasure. Perhaps the truth lies in the tension between the two, that Yangdi was both creator and destroyer, visionary and addict, sovereign and prisoner of desire. You walk further, and the palace darkens. The carved dragons on the beams above seem to twist in shadow, no longer guardians but mourners. The silence grows heavy, as though the stones themselves are grieving. And yet beneath the sorrow there lingers a strange allure. For Yangdi's palace was more than a ruin. It was a mirror. In its banquets, in its disguises, in its betrayals, it reflected the eternal truth of power. That every throne is both altar and trap. Every ruler both master and captive. The lantern before you gutters, then fades. The hall dissolves into shadow. And you, silent guest, are left with only the echo of silk sliding against stone, of laughter vanishing into silence, of an emperor whose name survives not for his victories, but for his forbidden pleasures. You close your eyes and the palace collapses into dream. The palace grows softer now. Its marble floors no longer echo with your steps. Instead, they feel like smooth river stones beneath your bare feet, cool and still. The lanterns that once burned with crimson fire have dwindled to pale embers. Their glow like fading stars in the hush before dawn. The air is quieter, gentler. Even the shadows seem to stretch and yawn as though preparing for sleep. You breathe in slowly. The scent of plum blossoms drifts faintly, almost forgotten, almost imagined. It carries with it not the weight of indulgence, but the lightness of memory. A perfume that whispers and then disappears into the folds of night. The courtesans, the music, the rivers of wine, all dissolve into silk threads unraveling in the dark. Only silence remains, kind, enveloping, steady. Imagine yourself walking away from the chambers of forbidden pleasures. The banners no longer conceal secrets. They hang loose, swaying gently, like curtains stirred by a night breeze. You step past them and feel the cool night sky open above you, vast and untroubled. The moon hangs low, silver and soft, not judgmental, only watching. The empire, the betrayals, the indulgence, all seem small beneath its steady light. As you lie back, perhaps on a mat of woven grass or simply in your own bed, you feel the weight of history exhale. The emperor's story is not yours to carry. You are free to let it slip away, like water flowing past stone, like silk sliding from the shoulder of a dancer. The voices that once clamored in the banquet hall grow distant, faint, then vanish altogether. There is only your breath now. In and out. The rise and fall of your chest, steady as the turning of the seasons. The world grows quieter, gentler, more distant. And as you drift into sleep, know that the gates of the palace have closed behind you. Its secrets are safe in the dark, locked away where even memory cannot disturb them. You are no longer a guest, no longer a witness. You are simply resting safe, untouchable, free. Sweet dreams.